Excuse me, but I think you've walked into the wrong building. Sloane Wexler spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. White Chanel dress, champagne in hand, she looked at Elise Navarro like a stray. Elise wore a gray blazer, jeans, a canvas tote. No name tag, no entourage. I have an invitation, Elise said calmly. This event is for investors, not the community program. Sloane smiled. The crowd began to whisper, eyes gleaming with amusement. I'm an investor, Elise replied. My name is on your sponsor list. The assistant checked the tablet, then shook his head. Sloane's tone hardened. If your name's not listed, you can't come in. This place is for people who belong. Elise typed a message, then looked up. Call Mr. Wexler. Sloane's smile froze. In 90 seconds, she would realize she'd just made the most expensive mistake of her life. Elise moved toward the registration table near the main hall's entrance. Behind it sat a young man in a navy suit. His hair gelled back, his posture straight. He was typing something into a tablet, his expression focused in that particular way people have when they want to look busy. When Elise stopped in front of him, he glanced up. His eyes traveled from her face to her blazer, to the canvas bag on her shoulder, then back to her face. Good evening, he said. His voice was polite, too polite. The kind of polite that was really a question. Can I help you? Elise reached into her bag and pulled out a cream-colored card, embossed with gold lettering. She placed it on the table between them. The young man picked it up, turned it over, then frowned. He tapped his tablet screen a few times, scrolled, tapped again. I'm sorry, he said, still looking at the screen. I don't see your name in the system. He looked up at her, his smile tight. Are you sure you have the right event? Sometimes invitations get mixed up. Around them, the low hum of conversation continued. A woman in a black cocktail dress turned slightly, her eyes flicking toward Elise, then away. A man in a gray suit leaned toward his companion and said something too quiet to hear. The companion smiled. Elise didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at the young man, her expression unchanged. Then she said, The invitation came directly from the host's office. Right, he said, nodding as if that explained something. But I still don't see... He stopped, glanced at the tablet again, then back at her. Do you have a confirmation email, or maybe a phone number I can check? Before Elise could answer, a woman approached from the side. She was older, maybe 50, with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She wore a headset and moved with the brisk efficiency of someone managing an event. She stopped beside the young man, leaned down slightly, and looked at the tablet screen, then at Elise. Is there a problem? She asked, not to Elise, to the young man. She says she has an invitation, but... I can see that, the woman said, cutting him off. She straightened, her eyes settling on Elise with a kind of measured patience. Ma'am, this is a private event. Invitation only. If your name isn't in the system, I'm afraid I can't let you in. Elise tilted her head slightly. And if I told you I'm one of the sponsors? The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or irritation. Then you'd be on the VIP list, which... She gestured toward the tablet. You're not. A small crowd had begun to form nearby, not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to watch. A silver-haired man in a pinstripe suit stood with his arms crossed. A younger woman beside him whispered something, and he nodded. Elise reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her phone. She unlocked it with her thumb, scrolled briefly, then turned the screen toward the woman. On it was an email thread. At the top, the sender, Harrison Wexler. The woman glanced at it. Her jaw tightened. Anyone can forward an email, she said. Elise locked her phone and slipped it back into her bag. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just took one step to the side, positioning herself where she had a clear view of the main hall's entrance and the LED screen beyond. Then she stood there, waiting. The young man looked at the woman. The woman looked at the young man. Neither of them moved. From somewhere near the bar, a voice rose slightly above the others. "Is security here tonight?" Elise's gaze didn't shift. She stood exactly where she was, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing even. On the screen behind her, the Navarro Capital logo rotated slowly, glowing white against a dark blue background. The murmur near the bar had grown louder. Heads were turning. A few guests drifted closer, champagne glasses at chest level, expressions hovering between curiosity and discomfort. No one intervened. They just watched. Then the crowd shifted and a woman stepped through. She was 28, blonde, hair falling in soft waves. She wore a white Chanel dress tailored perfectly and moved with the confidence of someone never told no. Her heels clicked against marble. Behind her, two men in suits followed at a polite distance. Not security, but the kind who made sure she never had to ask twice. Sloane Wexler stopped a few feet from Elise. Her eyes moved over her slowly, the blazer, the jeans, the canvas bag. When her gaze settled on Elise's face, she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "I think there's been some confusion," Sloane said, her voice light, almost musical. "This event is private, invitation only, really just for our investors and partners." She paused. "I'm sure you understand." Elise met her gaze. "I'm an investor." Sloane's smile widened. No warmth. She glanced at the young man behind the table, then back. "Are you?" Softer, then louder. "Can you check the list again? Maybe there's been a mistake." The young man tapped his tablet. Sloane turned back to Elise, patient, expectant. Around them, the crowd had grown. A man in his 60s, silver hair, Rolex catching light. A woman in red, phone angled toward the scene. Someone laughed quietly. Someone whispered. "Nothing here," the young man said. Sloane sighed. A soft sound, somehow loud in the silence. "I think maybe you're thinking of a different event. We had a charity thing last week for underserved communities. That might be what you're remembering?" The words hung in the air. Elise didn't flinch, didn't blink. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, and put it back. Sloane's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" Elise didn't answer. She took one step to the side, positioning herself with a clear view of the main hall. The stage, the screen where Navarro Capital's logo still rotated. "Ma'am," the woman with the clipboard said, stepping forward, "if you're not on the list, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Sloane crossed her arms. "Or maybe you walked in through the wrong entrance. Staff and vendors usually come in through the side. Easy to get confused if you've never been here before." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Not loud, not cruel, just there. The kind that said, "We all know what's happening." Elise's gaze shifted from Sloane to the woman, then to the young man. None looked away. None seemed uncomfortable. They were protecting the event, maintaining standards, making sure the right people stayed inside and the wrong people stayed out. Elise's phone buzzed once. She didn't reach for it. She just stood there, silent, calm. Behind her, the Navarro Capital logo continued to glow. And somewhere, 17 floors above, a single email marked urgent appeared in Harrison Wexler's inbox. Sloane turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. When someone like her spoke, people listened. "I want to be clear about something," she said, her tone steady, measured. "This event represents years of work, years of building relationships, of trust, of standards." She gestured vaguely toward Elise without looking at her. "And when someone shows up uninvited, dressed like this, trying to push their way into a space they don't belong, it undermines everything we've built." A few heads nodded. A woman in diamonds murmured something to her companion. The man with the Rolex shifted his weight, his arms still crossed, his expression unreadable. Sloane continued. "I'm not trying to be unkind. I'm really not. But there are rules. There are processes. And those processes exist for a reason. She finally turned back to Elise, her smile returning, softer now, almost pitying. Do you really think you belong here? Look around. These are people who have built empires, who have created value, who have earned their seat at the table. She paused, letting the silence stretch. What have you built? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elise didn't answer. She didn't move. Her hands remained at her sides, her posture relaxed, her breathing even. But something shifted in her eyes, something small, something most people wouldn't notice. Not anger, not hurt, just a kind of quiet awareness, like someone watching a storm roll in from a distance. Sloane took a step closer. You know what I think? She said, her voice dropping just slightly. I think you saw an opportunity, a chance to walk into a room full of wealth and power and maybe, I don't know, network, make connections, get your foot in the door. She shook her head slowly. But that's not how this works. You can't just show up and expect to be let in. This isn't a public space. This is our space, and we decide who gets to be here. A man near the back of the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A younger woman beside him whispered something, and he nodded, but neither of them left. No one left. They just stood there, watching. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward again, her voice firm. Ma'am, you need to leave. Now, or I'll have to call security. Elise finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, calm, almost conversational. These rules you keep mentioning, she said, looking directly at Sloane. Who wrote them? Sloane blinked. Excuse me? The rules, Elise repeated. The processes, the standards. She tilted her head slightly. Who decided what they are? Who decides who belongs and who doesn't? Sloane's smile tightened. People who've earned the right to make those decisions. And how does one earn that right? By building something. Sloane's voice had an edge now, sharp and clean. By contributing, by being someone who matters. Elise nodded slowly, as if considering this. Then she reached into her bag again and pulled out her phone. She didn't unlock it this time. She just held it loosely in her hand, her thumb resting on the screen. I see, she said softly. Sloane watched her, confusion flickering across her face. What are you doing? Elise didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly, angling herself so she could see both Sloane and the entrance to the main hall. Then she brought the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. Marcus, Elise said, her voice still calm, still quiet. Activate Clause 7.3. A pause. Yes, all of it, effective immediately. Another pause. I'll explain later. Just do it. She lowered the phone and slipped it back into her bag. Then she looked at Sloane, and for the first time since she'd walked into Prescott Hall, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't triumphant or cruel. It was just there, small, certain. You asked what I've built, Elise said. Her voice was still quiet, but somehow it carried. You're standing in it. Sloane's face went pale, not all at once. It started at her cheeks and spread slowly like frost across glass. What did you just do? Elise didn't answer. She just stood there, her hands at her sides again, her breathing even. Around them, the crowd had gone silent. No more whispers, no more laughter. Just the low hum of the event continuing in the main hall, oblivious to what was happening at the entrance. The woman with the clipboard looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at Elise. And somewhere, in an office 17 floors above, Harrison Wexler stared at his phone screen, his hands shaking, as the words, Capital Withdrawal Notice, $3.2 billion appeared in bold red letters. Because Clause 7.3 wasn't just a contract term, it was an emergency exit. A trapdoor built into the foundation of the Wexler empire 2 years ago, when Navarro Capital had pulled them back from the edge of bankruptcy. It was insurance, a fail-safe, and it had just been triggered by the woman they'd told didn't belong. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended mid-air, conversations paused mid-sentence. Sloane stared at Elise, her mouth slightly open, her carefully composed expression beginning to fracture. The woman with the clipboard looked between them, confused, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Then Sloane's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She glanced down at it, and whatever she saw on the screen made her face go from pale to ashen. Her hand trembled slightly as she brought the phone to her ear. "Daddy?" Her voice was small now, uncertain. "What's—" She stopped, listened, her eyes widened. "What do you mean, withdrawn? All of it?" Another pause. Her gaze snapped to Elise, and for the first time there was something other than confidence in her expression. There was fear. "Who is she?" Elise didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, hands at her sides, watching Sloane unravel in real time. Sloane lowered the phone slowly. Her breathing had quickened, shallow and uneven. "You?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're—" "I tried to tell you," Elise said quietly. "I'm an investor." Sloane's face twisted. Confusion gave way to anger, sharp and sudden. "No, that's not—" She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "She's lying. She has to be lying. My father would have told me if—" She stopped, because even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Harrison Wexler didn't tell his daughter everything. He didn't tell her about the emergency loans, about the quiet meetings with Navarro Capital 2 years ago when the Wexler Group was hemorrhaging money and no one else would touch them. He didn't tell her because he didn't think she needed to know. But now she needed to know. And it was too late. "Security," Sloane said, her voice cracking slightly. "Someone get security. She doesn't belong here. Ms. Wexler." The woman with the clipboard stepped forward, her tone careful, professional. "Maybe we should step aside and—" "No." Sloane's voice was sharp now, loud enough that people in the main hall were starting to turn their heads. "I want her out. Now. She walked in here uninvited and now she's trying to sabotage us. She's trying to ruin everything." A man near the back of the crowd cleared his throat. "Sloane," he said quietly, "maybe you should—" "Shut up, Richard." Sloane didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Elise, and there was something wild in them now, something unmoored. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know who we are? What we've built?" Elise tilted her head slightly. "I know exactly what you've built. I paid for half of it." The words landed like a slap. Sloane took a step back, her heel catching slightly on the marble floor. Around them, the crowd had grown. People from the main hall were drifting toward the entrance now, drawn by the raised voices, the tension crackling in the air. Phones were out, cameras angled. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the event?" Sloane's hands were shaking now. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone, who could fix this. Her 2 assistants stood a few feet away, uncertain, waiting for instructions. The young man at the registration table had stopped typing. The woman with the clipboard was speaking quietly into her headset, her expression tight. "You think you can just walk in here and destroy us?" Sloane said, her voice breaking. "You think you can—" She stopped, her breath hitching. "Who do you think you are?" Before Elise could answer, a new voice cut through the crowd. Deep, commanding, edged with panic. "Sloane!" Harrison Wexler pushed through the gathering, his silver hair slightly disheveled. His tie loosened. He was in his mid-60s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd built his fortune on real estate and reputation. But right now he looked smaller than he should. Older. His face was flushed, his eyes wide, and when he saw Elise standing there, calm and still in the center of the chaos, he stopped. "Ms. Navarro," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, let's talk about this." Sloane turned to her father, her face twisted with confusion. "Daddy, Be quiet!" Harrison didn't look at her. He was staring at Elise, his hands held up slightly, palms out as if approaching a dangerous animal. "Ms. Navarro, I apologize. I didn't know you were here. If I had, I would have—" "You would have what?" Elise's voice was still quiet, but it carried. "Greeted me at the door? Made sure I had a name tag?" She paused. "Or would you have done exactly what your daughter did?" Harrison flinched. "That's not fair. I didn't know she—" "You didn't know," Elise repeated, nodding slowly. "You didn't know your daughter was turning away the person who saved your company. You didn't know she was publicly humiliating the CEO of your largest investor. You didn't know." She let the words hang there. "What did you know, Mr. Wexler?" The crowd was silent now. Even the background noise from the main hall seemed to fade, as if the entire building were holding its breath. Harrison opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Sloane looked between them, her confusion deepening. "What is she talking about? Daddy, what is she—" "Sloane." Harrison's voice was sharp now, desperate. "Not now." But it was too late. The crowd had heard enough. The pieces were coming together. A woman near the front pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, the first post went live. "Who is Elise Navarro, Wexler Group CEO, losing it at Founders and Future?" The hashtag $Prescott Hall began to trend. Then Wexler meltdown. Then Navarro Capital. Sloane's phone buzzed again, and again, and again. She looked down at it, and whatever she saw made her face go white. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "Ms. Navarro," Harrison said, his voice breaking. "Please, we can fix this. Whatever you want, whatever you need. Just tell me what to do." Elise looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "You can't fix this." Harrison's shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly older, smaller, like a man who'd just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Please," he said again, and this time it was barely a whisper. Elise turned to leave. She didn't rush, didn't storm out. She just turned, slowly, deliberately, and began walking toward the exit. The crowd parted for her automatically, people stepping aside, their eyes following her as she moved through them like water through stone. Behind her, Sloane's voice rose, shrill and desperate. "You can't do this! You can't just—" She turned to her father, her face crumpling. "Daddy, stop her! Do something!" But Harrison didn't move. He just stood there, watching Elise walk away, his hands hanging useless at his sides. And on the massive LED screen in the main hall, the Navarro Capital logo flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The silence that followed was deafening. No music, no conversation. Just the sound of Elise's footsteps on marble, steady and sure, as she walked out of Prescott Hall and into the October night. And somewhere in offices across Boston, in boardrooms and trading floors and conference calls, the news was already spreading. Navarro Capital had pulled out. $3.2 billion. Gone. Just like that. And the Wexler Group, the cornerstone of the evening's event, the reason half the people in that room were even there, was about to collapse. All because they didn't think a black woman in a canvas bag belonged. Elise had made it halfway to the exit when the main doors swung open again. A man stepped through. Tall, black, mid-40s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like it had been made for him. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. People stepped aside without thinking about it. His gaze swept the room once, sharp and assessing, and then his eyes found Elise. Marcus Reed, Chief Operating Officer of Navarro Capital. He crossed the marble floor in long, even strides, and when he reached Elise, he stopped just beside her, close enough that they could speak without the crowd hearing. "It's done," he said quietly. "Legal is processing the withdrawal now. Board's been notified. They're asking if you want a statement prepared." Elise shook her head once. "Not yet." Marcus nodded, then turned to face the crowd that had gathered. The room had fallen silent again, everyone watching, waiting to understand what was happening. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wireless microphone. He clipped it to his lapel, tapped it twice, and the speakers throughout Prescott Hall crackled to life. "Good evening," Marcus said. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of voice that had delivered quarterly earnings reports to rooms full of investors. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Navarro Capital." He paused, letting the name settle over the room like a weight. "I'm here tonight to introduce someone who should have been introduced the moment she walked through those doors." The crowd shifted. Phones were still out, still recording. On the edge of the gathering, a reporter from Bloomberg stood with her notebook open, pen moving quickly across the page. "Ms. Elise Navarro," Marcus continued, gesturing toward her, "is the founder and CEO of Navarro Capital. 2 years ago, when the Wexler Group was facing insolvency, when banks had stopped returning their calls and their stock price had dropped 73%, Ms. Navarro stepped in. She didn't just invest, she restructured, she rebuilt, she saved this company." He let that sit for a moment, his gaze moving slowly across the faces staring back at him. "The amount she invested was $3.2 billion. That investment is the reason this event is happening tonight. It's the reason most of you are here." Harrison Wexler stood frozen near the registration table, his face pale, his eyes locked on Marcus. Beside him, Sloane had gone completely still, her phone clutched in her hand, her breathing shallow and quick. Marcus turned slightly, his expression never changing. "And tonight, after Ms. Navarro was denied entry to this event, questioned about her invitation, publicly humiliated, and told she didn't belong in a space that her capital literally made possible." He paused, and the pause was intentional, calculated, designed to let every word sink in. "She made a decision. As of approximately 20 minutes ago, Navarro Capital has formally withdrawn all invested capital from the Wexler Group, $3.2 billion, effective immediately, under the emergency exit clause negotiated at the time of the original investment." The room erupted, not in cheers or applause, but in a sudden, sharp rush of noise, gasps, exclamations, the sound of dozens of people all trying to speak at once. Phones were raised higher. The Bloomberg reporter was typing furiously into her tablet. Near the bar, a group of venture capitalists huddled together, their faces tight with shock and something that looked like fear. Marcus waited for the noise to subside, then continued, his voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "That capital will be redirected in full to the Ujima Fund, a new initiative being announced tonight, dedicated exclusively to supporting startups founded by women of color. $500 million committed in the first year. Applications open Monday." This time the sound was different. Scattered applause began somewhere near the back of the room, hesitant at first, then growing. Not from the men in $1,000 suits, not from the women in designer dresses, but from the waitstaff standing along the walls in their black vests, from the event coordinators with their headsets and clipboards, from the bartenders and the valets and the people who made events like this run but were never invited to attend them. They clapped because they understood. They clapped because they'd been exactly where Elise had been, standing in a space they'd been told they didn't belong, trying to prove their worth to people who'd already decided they had none. And now, watching her walk away with her head high and her power intact, they saw something they'd never seen before. They saw what winning looked like. Harrison Wexler finally moved. He took a lurching step toward Elise, his hand half raised as if to physically stop her. "Ms. Navarro," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "Please, I'm begging you. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this. I can make this right. I can fix." Elise looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, everyone in the room could see what she was thinking. She was thinking about the 2 years of quarterly reports she'd reviewed at midnight, the restructuring plans she'd approved on weekends, the late-night conference calls with Marcus, going over every line item, making sure the Wexler Group didn't just survive, but thrived. She'd done that work, not because she owed them anything, but because that's what good capital does. It builds, it supports, it creates opportunity where there was none. And this was how they'd repaid her. "You can't make this right, Mr. Wexler," Elise said, and her voice was still quiet, still calm, but it carried across the entire hall. "Because this isn't about money. It never was. It's about respect. And you can't buy that back once you've thrown it away." She turned to Marcus, gave him a small nod, and together they walked toward the exit. The crowd parted automatically, creating a path. No one tried to stop them. No one spoke. They just stood there watching the woman who'd held their entire evening in her hands walk away with it. As Elise reached the door, she paused, turned back. Her eyes found Sloane Wexler, still standing beside her father, still holding her phone, still trying to process how everything had collapsed so quickly. "You asked me what I've built, Ms. Wexler," Elise said. Her voice was steady, final. "I built all of this, and now I'm taking it back." Then she walked out into the October night, and the door closed behind her with a soft, irreversible click. 48 hours later, the financial press had turned the story into a feeding frenzy. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Navarro Capital pulls 3.2 billion from Wexler Group after CEO denied entry to gala." Bloomberg followed with, "When respect costs billions, the Prescott Hall incident." By Monday morning, the hashtag Dodge or Prescott Hall scandal had been viewed over 12 million times. The video, shot by 3 different guests on their phones, had gone viral. In it, you could see everything. Sloane's dismissive gestures, the crowd's laughter, Elise's calm silence, and then Marcus Reed's announcement, clear and devastating. The market responded swiftly. Wexler Group's stock price dropped 41% in the first trading session. By Tuesday, Harrison Wexler had submitted his resignation to the board, effective immediately. The statement was brief, professional, and carefully worded by lawyers. It mentioned leadership transition and strategic realignment. It did not mention his daughter, but everyone knew. Sloane Wexler was terminated from her position as Director of Strategic Development on Wednesday morning. The board cited conduct unbecoming and violation of company values. But the real reason was simpler. She had cost them $3.2 billion and destroyed their reputation in less than 2 minutes. The SEC opened an inquiry into whether her actions constituted systematic discrimination, and preliminary findings suggested a pattern. Other investors, other partners, other people who didn't fit, had been quietly turned away over the years. Sloane faced civil penalties and a 5-year ban from holding executive positions in any publicly traded company. Her father's empire, built over 4 decades, had fractured in a single weekend, and the fractures ran deep. CNN ran a segment featuring interviews with former Wexler Group employees, 3 black women, 2 Latina men, 1 Asian American woman, all of whom described similar experiences. Being passed over for promotions, being questioned in meetings, being told, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that they didn't quite belong. The segment was titled, "The Culture That $3 Billion Bought." It aired during prime time and was watched by over 4 million people. Elise Navarro did not give interviews. She did not appear on television. She did not issue statements beyond the brief press release announcing the Ujima Fund. The release was 3 paragraphs long. It explained the fund's mission to invest in startups founded by women of color who had been overlooked by traditional venture capital. It listed the initial commitment, $500 million, and it ended with a single line. Capital should build equity, not gatekeep it. Within 1 week of the announcement, the fund received over 2,000 applications. By the end of the month, that number had tripled. The first cohort of investments was announced 6 weeks later. 12 companies, ranging from biotech to fintech to sustainable agriculture, all led by women of color, all previously rejected by at least 3 major VC firms. The press coverage was extensive, but Elise still didn't give interviews. She let the work speak for itself. Marcus Reed appeared on CNBC once briefly to discuss the fund's structure. When the anchor asked him about the Prescott Hall incident, he said only, "Ms. Navarro has always believed that respect and capital go hand in hand. When one is absent, the other should be too." Then he moved the conversation back to the startups they were supporting. The message was clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reallocation, moving resources from institutions that didn't value people to ones that did, from spaces that gate-kept to spaces that opened doors. It wasn't punishment, it was correction. But to Sloan Wexler, sitting in her Boston apartment with her phone turned off and her LinkedIn profile deleted, it felt like the end of the world. 2 weeks after the Prescott Hall incident, Elise Navarro published a single post on LinkedIn. It wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It was simply true. "I didn't withdraw my capital to punish anyone," she wrote. "I withdrew it because my money has to go where I'm respected, not tolerated, not accommodated after the fact, but respected from the beginning, from the moment I walked through the door." She continued, "For 2 years, I worked to rebuild a company that had been mismanaged into near bankruptcy. I did that work quietly, without needing recognition. I did it because that's what good capital does. It builds. But capital isn't neutral. It reflects values. And when those values don't align, when respect is conditional or absent, that capital needs to move." She ended with this: "The Ujima Fund isn't about charity. It's about correction. It's about putting resources in the hands of people who've been building brilliant companies without access to the systems built to keep them out. We're not asking for a seat at the table anymore. We're building our own table, and everyone's invited, as long as they come with respect." The post was shared over 2 million times. Hundreds of comments came from women of color working in finance, tech, venture capital, women who'd been in rooms like Prescott Hall, questioned, dismissed, told they didn't belong. They shared their stories. They thanked Elise for doing what many had wanted to do but couldn't afford to. But Elise didn't respond to the comments. She didn't do press tours or keynote speeches. She simply went back to work. Because this had always been about changing the system, not becoming a hero, not seeking validation from institutions that failed her, but creating new ones that wouldn't fail the next generation. 6 months later, the first cohort of Ujima Fund companies reported a combined revenue increase of 47%. 3 secured follow-on funding. 1 went public. The founders, all women of color, appeared on magazine covers and hired teams that looked like them. And Elise Navarro watched from the background, silent and steady, knowing real power wasn't about being seen. It was about making sure others could be. Today, you have a choice. You can invest in people who are actually building something, or you can invest in people who are just guarding the gate. You can put your capital into systems that respect everyone who walks through the door, or you can keep funding the ones that make people prove they belong before they're even allowed to sit down. The Ujima Fund is open. Applications are live. If you're a woman of color building something that matters, something that solves real problems, something the traditional venture capital world told you wasn't scalable or market-ready, apply. We're listening. We're investing. And we're not asking you to look a certain way or know the right people. We're asking you to build. And if you're someone with capital, an investor, an LP, someone who writes checks, ask yourself, where is your money going? Is it going to people who open doors or people who keep them closed? Is it building equity or just maintaining the same old hierarchies with fresh paint? Because here's what they don't tell you. Capital is a tool. It can build or destroy, create opportunity or hoard it. The choice has always been yours. The question is whether you're brave enough to make it. Sloane Wexler learned something that night at Prescott Hall. She learned that privilege isn't power. Privilege is what you're born with. Power is what you build. And when you confuse the two, when you think your last name or your ability to say, "This is our space," gives you control, that's when you find out what power really looks like. It looks like a woman in a canvas bag standing silent while everything you thought you owned disappears. It looks like $3.2 billion walking out the door. It looks like respect that can't be bought back. So here's the truth. Elise Navarro would never say out loud, but everyone understood. They counted you out. Now make them count on you. Don't ask for a seat at their table. Buy the whole damn table. Then decide who sits.